So this is our third summit, as Jordan said, and I'm so thrilled to welcome you all. With everything happening in the world, we expanded our audience and strengthened our mission to deliver high-quality, trustworthy reporting at a time when Canadians need it the most.
The economic road ahead demands that we invest in Canada, that we knock down internal trade barriers, that we build digital infrastructure.
Instead of talking about how the world is sucking content away from Canada and not giving it credit for its culture, all of a sudden Canada will be setting the rules of what the culture is around the rest of the world.
Our job as journalists is not to tell you what to think. It's not to advocate for one position or another. It's to facilitate the conversations. We remain so grateful to you for reading The Logic, for sharing our journalism, for subscribing, and for supporting independent media in Canada. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is David Skok. I'm the founder and CEO of The Logic. It is Thursday, March 5th, 12 p.m. Eastern Time. March 5th feels like it's already been 5 years in 2026. But here we are anyways, 2 months into the year of entering our third month. And what a great time to have a conversation about how to build a resilient workforce. I'm so excited to welcome you to this conversation and to get it underway. First, want to really give a huge thank you to the Logic subscribers. None of this is possible without you. We rely on you, especially now in a world where so many things are available through AI platforms and other things. The community that we're building through the Logic is so vital, and it's conversations like this that we are grateful that you can join us for, and that really show the value and purpose of building a community together. If you are not yet subscribed to the Logic, please check out the link in the chat to get started. And if your team should be reading this, we do offer generous discounts for teams and also special offers and more advanced work coming on that side of the business. So please reach out to us through the information in the chat, and we will get back to you. Before we get going here, it is my absolute delight to introduce you to Marie-Chantal Cote from Sun Life Health. Marie-Chantal has been a partner of ours for quite a while now. We're grateful to see her. It's lovely to see her. And we've really, with Sun Life, had a lot of great conversations about resiliency and about workforce and about healthcare. And so before we get going here, I think it would be a great start for Marie-Chantal to kind of tee us up for this conversation and let us know a little bit about how Sun Life is thinking about these very complex issues. So good afternoon, Marie-Chantal.
Thank you very much, David. And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this great conversation. I'm so glad you could join today. If there's one thing that we all seem to have in common right now, it's that the pace of change feels relentless. Many of us are juggling a lot, whether that's professionally, personally, and often at the same time. And for many Canadians, it can feel like there's very little margin left. At Sun Life, when we talk about resilience, we're not talking about pushing people to simply tough it out or do more with less. We're talking about something much more human. The ability to adapt, to recover, and to keep moving forward in a way that is sustainable for the individuals, for their teams, and for organization. That's really why today's conversation matters. Canadians are facing a unique convergence of pressures: the cost of living concerns, global uncertainty, or even the very physical and emotional impacts of climate change. For employers, this really does create a real tension. The expectations on organizations haven't gone down, but many employees are running on empty. What we're seeing in the group benefit space is that resilience has become a business imperative. It's not a nice to have. Employers are increasingly telling us that productivity, engagement, retention are deeply connected to how supported people feel, and not just at work, but in their lives more broadly. And that's a really important shift, because resilience isn't something employees can or should be expected to build alone. It's really something that employers play a critical role in creating the conditions where resilience is possible. We see this in a few key ways. First, psychological safety and mental health support. Those have moved to the center of the conversation. People need to know it's okay to ask for help, and that help will be there when people ask. Benefits that are easy to access, flexible, and stigma-free matter more than ever. Second thing we think about is the growing focus on holistic well-being, whether financial health, physical health, mental health, that's all interconnected. When someone is worried about making ends meet or managing a chronic condition or caring for a loved one, the stress doesn't stay neatly outside of the work hours. Employers who acknowledge this reality and design benefits with the whole person in mind are better positioned to support a resilient workforce. And the third one is about leadership and culture, and those matter just as much, if not more, than the programs themselves. The tone set by leaders, how openly they talk about burnout, mental health, balance, uncertainty, can either reinforce pressure or relieve it. Sometimes resilience shows up not as another initiative, but as permission. Permission to take time, permission to reset, permission to be human. What's encouraging is that many employers are leaning into this moment. All of you here are testimony to that. They're asking harder questions about how work gets done, how flexibility is offered, and how support shows up at critical moments in an employee's life. They're recognizing that resilience isn't about bouncing back to normal. It's about adapting to a new reality with intention and with care. And that's exactly why today's discussion is so timely and so important. We are honored at Sun Life to be the presenting sponsor of this conversation with The Logic and to be joined by leaders who bring deep, practical perspectives on what resilience looks like in action across organization, industries, and leadership roles. In the next 45 minutes, I hope you'll hear ideas that feel grounded, honest, and useful, ideas that acknowledge the pressure many people are under, while also pointing out what's possible when resilience is treated as a shared responsibility. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time for this important conversation. I'm pleased to hand this over to David Skok, CEO and Editor-in-Chief of The Logic, to guide today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie Chantal. And I think I want to just, re-emphasize what you said there about health being about financial, physical, and mental health. And so I'm hoping that when we have this conversation, we can ground it in all three, because it's actually quite recent for people to be thinking, or leaders to be thinking about it in those three categories. And certainly as the world's events are happening, thinking about it among those three criteria is so important. Okay, let me introduce the panel. You shouldn't have their bios and know who they are already, so I'll keep it quite brief. But just to introduce this incredible panel, we have Carolyn Dewar, Senior Partner in McKinsey & Company, best-selling author time and time again. It's getting a bit nauseating how many best-selling books she has on the New York Times list in talking to CEOs. Carolyn, it's great to see you again. And a proud Canadian, I should say, coming to us from the Valley. Jonathan Metrick, Operating Partner and Chief Growth Officer at Sagard, also a proud Canadian coming to us from New York City. And Dina Sergi, CEO, Well Health Diagnostics Center. For the audience, I'm ready for your questions. Don't wait till the end for me to prompt you. Please submit your questions. We will have them via the chat and the Q&A box, and I will try to get to as many of them as possible. Okay, so let's start the conversation. 2020, March of 2020, COVID hits. And I have a theory that we're still in the pandemic in a way, and leaders are still having to navigate the fallout from that. And essentially, it's going to be a decade of a pandemic. And everything that has happened since March of 2020 has kind of steamrolled us to this point where now you have war in the Middle East and other things. So maybe, Carolyn, I'll start with you. Longitudinally, if you go back and look at how leaders over the time, when you were talking to them in the 2000s, then the 2010s, now the 2020s, what is the sense? Are leaders aware of these transformational shifts actually happening, and how are they responding to them?
Gosh, yeah, there's just been a lot, right? And we're all living through a lot. We've had a lot of debates amongst ourselves of, is it technically a more turbulent time than it was in the 70s or it was in post-war? We've had those debates. I think what no one would argue is the pace of change, the scale of change, and all of the stakeholders that are being impacted at once. It is an extraordinary moment right now, right? And so I don't know that we need to compare versus other times, but we are in an extraordinary moment. And I think you're right when you think about since March, the start of the pandemic, all of the layers that have come on top. It's one of the first times that CEOs or leaders have been asked to actually make life and death health decisions for their employees that felt so acute. I mean, people who went to MBA school didn't feel like they'd been trained to make those calls, right? And then again, as you say, here in the US, you layer on, social unrest and George Floyd, you layer on, AI and the wonderful opportunities of that, but also the threats and risks people feel to their employment, geopolitics, trade, all of the things. It's a lot, right? And so how do leaders in this moment navigate not just all the issues, but all the stakeholders as well that they're trying to, serve on behalf of?
And we will go into each of those issues, I think, particularly AI and other things. Jonathan, it used to be that if you were founding a company and you were, working with an LP like Sagard or an investment firm, the job was pretty simple. It was, tell your board, hey, here's how we're performing. Here are the financials. Here's our hockey stick growth, and that was it. How are small and mid cap founder-led companies adjusting to this new normal?
Yeah, I think I would kind of echo Carolyn's point around you've always had to deal with change, but I think the rate of change has been faster. And so even, since the pandemic, we've gone through, the kind of growth at all costs era where everything was expanding rapidly in 2020, 2021. And then, interest rates went up and, capital funding dried up. And then there was a flight to quality, a flight to profitability, which was a major shift for early stage kind of tech driven startups. And now we're in another macro change with the adoption of AI and looking for efficiency, automation, and trying to integrate a very kind of macro technology trend in a very short period of time. And so, those three pieces, growth at all costs to profitable growth to the era of AI, were all within 6 years. And I think each of those might have been in a 5 to 10 year time frame previously, but truncated into kind of, a very short time frame. So I do think founders, startup founders, business leaders are feeling that kind of compression of time frame.
Okay, so Dina, how does that manifest on the ground? In terms of, look, I can't obviously ignore the fact that I myself am a founder, so I can, regale you all with my own stories. But how does it manifest at the CEO level when they come to you, or when you have on the front lines doctors who are talking to you about the leaders that are coming to them for support? What are they hearing from them?
Wow, great question, David. Thank you. So there's no way around it. Obviously, healthcare has been tested in the last few years in ways that we couldn't anticipate. So the demand continues to rise, the population continues to age, volumes increase, but at the same time, we're navigating workforce shortages, administrative burden, rapid technology change, which we're talking about AI, which adapting into healthcare is already different and complicated in its own ways. So in all reality, the actual Canadian healthcare system, resilience actually doesn't just mean endurance. It doesn't mean just withstanding the pressure. It's actually maintaining the clinical excellence while still modernizing operations. You're trying to protect your workforce from burnout, yet still increasing capacity. It's integrating technology, but portraying it that it's support. It's not meant to replace, which it is nauseating for anyone to go and think that AI is going to continue to replace my role, because there is a high element of human expertise in healthcare. So it's a lot to balance, but there's an operational strength that needs to be maintained and has to be invested in. There's a digital enablement, which does take time, and the intention behind it is actually to reduce the administrative burden and to improve accuracy or to be able to give clinicians or staff back valuable time, not to replace them. And then there's the workforce sustainability aspect. So again, any resilient organization needs to be one where people feel supported. And in our system, it's people supporting people. It's clinicians helping people. It's staff, technologists, nurses helping people. You don't want to replace that. So it's actively exploring different ways, whether it's automation or centralization, equipment. The list goes on, but it really is that clear role and measurable goals as to how we continue to communicate this and how the culture continues to recognize all of these changes contribute to growth, and sustainability.
Dina, I just want to follow up on, so as I mentioned earlier, Marie Chantal's framing of this as a financial, physical, and mental health.
Mhm.
In the healthcare system, are those still viewed as very siloed, separate things, or is there a greater breaking down of those barriers and an understanding that, if someone's in an affordability crisis and can't afford to feed their family, that is going to have downstream impacts on their physical health. And then, if there's war and they have loved ones in the Middle East right now, that's also going to affect maybe their financial and physical health. Are we breaking down those silos and understanding the aspects that make up resilience?
Yeah, so very much a hot topic. I would say healthcare is no different. The delivery, the service delivery, the product delivery, it doesn't change. It's still humans going into this. And I would say the Canadian environment is more of in a precarious state. Years ago, and we'll chat about, you mentioned 2020, the mindset was scarcity, right? Not enough resources, not enough people, not enough cash, and we're all worried about different things. And now it's a matter of you might have some cash, you do have a job, but everything seems unstable, which exactly as Carolyn was saying, it's a very different mindset that we're dealing with. And there is a subset of people, healthcare workers or not, that feel it a little bit more. Like there's women, the younger generation, they actually tend to be a little bit more vulnerable in this. And there is an adaptive stance to this that we need to take. Healthcare, at least 80% of our workforce is actually women. And so now you already have this vulnerable state. You have a more vulnerable population. And then you have a shortage of workforce resources, or health human resource crisis that we're in, that those that do enter the workforce are younger or coming in from foreign countries. It is a highly precarious state. And the one thing that has remained constant is that they need leaders with anchors. They need resiliency from the top. They need to know that leaders are not feeling the pressures. And it comes out, it shows. There's no way to hide that. And you would see this in organizational foundations that truly have cracks in the system or the way in which we operate. So that consistency for us has actually been key. And that's one thing that has actually sustained our workforce, I would say. Does it eliminate all fears? No. We can't do that, and as much as I would love to, but it does very much allow our staff to know via many different realms and platforms or communications that the goal is to ensure that the staff do not feel vulnerable at work. They're not afraid about losing their jobs, irrespective of digital enablement, or the increasing demands or the need to always provide excellent care when you're stressed. They need to know that there is a pillar in leadership, and in this case, it's organizations. It can be governmental, it can be in any which way, that actually has some form of stability for them.
Okay, so Carolyn, tell me or others on this call what that actually looks like in practice. What are the frameworks that leaders are thinking about to be that pillar? Because I hear Dina, and my first reaction is, well, maybe I can't be a pillar of strength all the time. I'm struggling just as much as you all are. So, how should leaders approach this from a mental model as they think about managing their teams?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think everyone is struggling with it, right? Two mental models I've seen that seem to be helpful, right? It's not that it's a perfect key of being that pillar. One is around how, in amidst all this uncertainty, can you provide some sense of direction of where are we headed, what's important, what is the work, right? And there's two pieces to that. One is being really grounded in the purpose of your organization. Amidst all of this change, when everything seems up in the air, why do we exist, right? Dina, you talked about patient care, right? What is that North Star of this won't change? This is what we're trying to do. The tools we might use might evolve. How we show up, whether we're remote or not, all those things might evolve. But why we're existing, what we're trying to do should be an anchoring force and lead to a set of priorities that, even again, amidst all the change, how do you as a leader kind of separate the signal from the noise and say, there's a lot going on, but these three things are true, or these things we are working on, or this is what is our priority right now? That's one piece of it, kind of the what. there's a piece on the how as well. And I think one of the CEOs we spent a lot of time with, he was actually the CEO of Cincinnati Children's Hospital. So maybe it came from kind of a healthcare background, Michael Fisher. He talks about a to-be list, where a lot of leaders have a to-do list, but they're not as intentional about their to-be list, because how they show up has a ripple effect down through the organization, whether they're intentional about it or not. Right? So if you walk in and you look stressed and you're scattered and worried, everyone feeds off that, right? At the same time, if you walk in and you're very grounded, that has a settling effect. And he takes it as literally as he prints out his agenda for the day, his meetings, still on a piece of paper. And he writes next to each meeting one word for how he needs to show up in that meeting. And this isn't about being inauthentic. It's saying, what does the organization need of its leader in that moment, right? Maybe there's a strategy meeting where everyone has been spinning for weeks and can't make a decision, and they actually need their leader just to be decisive. Even though he doesn't like to be the top-down guy, that's what his team needs. Maybe the next meeting is an all hands with 1,000 people where he needs to rally them and help them feel inspired. Again, it doesn't actually matter how he's feeling that day. His organization needs him to be inspiring in that moment. That's a lot for leaders, but the ones who do it well realize that it can just have an amplifying effect in their organization.
It reminds me a lot of change management principles, right? Like if, are you on a burning platform, you need a different kind of leader, maybe an outside leader, than if you were a stability or internal candidate, you would probably need for that. And how do you use the situations? There was a question from Lenora Brown, and Carolyn, I'll come to you with this. So then that's the leader, that's, excuse me, that's the executive level. What about at the board level? How can boards, to quote Lenora here, how can boards better reinforce workforce resilience in the context of governance oversight? And what is the responsibility of boards in working with their executives?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question. I think it's something boards are still working through, right? Their responsibilities have shifted as much over the last few years as well. For a while, they were all very hands-on, almost, surrogate management teams. What is the idea of being oversight without being kind of meddling? But I think boards also realize that they're not just responsible for backward-looking performance, but actually the go-forward health and culture and ability of the organization to deliver. And with that as the mandate, I think it's completely appropriate to think about the talents you have, the bench you have, the experiences they have, the resilience that they have. And I think boards, increasingly are looking at cultural diagnostics for the organization, not just happy smiley meter stuff, right? But are they aligned? Are they accountable? Are they working at pace? And do they have engaged employees who are equipped with the skills and the experiences they need to be successful? I think those are all absolutely relevant topics for boards to have governance over.
Jonathan, one of the interesting things about the AI boom or adoption curve here is that by all accounts, it's the senior leaders in the organizations that are using AI and adopting it, and more aggressively than the rest of the teams. And as someone who manages a portfolio of companies and is motivating those tech leaders, I assume one of the things you're saying is, you got to get the AI efficiencies in your organization that you talked about. Do you have a theory as to why it's currently happening at the high end, at the senior level, and not really at the front lines? And the second part of that, and maybe I'll try to tie in Abhi's question from Edmonton here, which is, for scaling companies, they don't necessarily have the time to do a lot of R&D and capital investment and energy to experiment, learn, and adopt these new tools as much as maybe a larger company with a capital and R&D investment approach has. So how do you push as you are a leader, managing these CEOs and companies? How far do you push? How much do you push? And how much do you just say, okay, listen, we'll wait till you get comfortable with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. Obviously, I work across some very emergent tech-based businesses, like Wealthsimple, Coho are within our portfolio. And, I actually see AI innovation happening across the board. I think there's, it's very important to have a top-down kind of, mandate or support or endorsement of senior management saying, hey, this is important. We're going to invest in this. We think you should be leaning into AI to try and think about it. But I find a lot of the innovation is actually happening in the teams, and it's the people who are actually doing the work that are able to take a look at a workflow and say, okay, great, my responsibility as a creative director is to create a bunch of ad units. And this is the process I've typically used. What AI tools can I implement in this flow to improve it, make it faster, make it better, make it cheaper? And I find, the top down is important from like a direction setting, but the actual innovation coming from the teams doing the work. And I think, it's interesting, everyone's kind of like, oh, well, how are we going to adopt AI? I think there's just certain folks that tend to be more excited about it than others, right? When the iPhone came out, I had a certain group of friends that were like the first ones to find it and the first ones to get it. And eventually it moved its way into kind of, innovators, early adopters, into kind of more mass. And I think that's going to be a very similar component with AI. I think to the question around, if my organization's smaller and we don't have an R&D budget, how are we going to compete, getting an AI adoption? I actually, obviously I'm biased. I love startups. I love working with scale-ups. I love working in smaller firms because you've got less, established processes. You're more empowered to actually own end-to-end workflows. So you may actually be able to adopt AI faster than a very large incumbent firm that has a lot of regulations. Teams and teams and teams have to approve certain processes to get them done. So, look at yourself as maybe we can actually adopt something small and get it actually out the door versus a much larger, slower moving organization that may have an R&D department, but they actually have a lot more saddled kind of incumbent legacy infrastructure to work through.
Carolyn, you wanted to jump in on that?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So first, I'll just agree a lot with what Jonathan's saying. And again, I'm sitting here in Silicon Valley, so maybe surrounded by it a bit. Everyone's using it, which I know is a bubble. But to link it to the well-being point, I do think there's a link here. In some of the larger companies that I'm seeing, the psychological safety is important for people to be willing to be creative and be bold and innovative with AI, right? There are people who are using AI outside of work and maybe being less bold, suggesting how it's used in work, because frankly, they're worried about their jobs, right? It's not rocket science. People are rational humans, right? And so how do we create safety in an organization, places where they can experiment, they can learn, they can also suggest new ideas without worrying that there's going to be immediate backlash on their team? It's like, great, now you only need half as many people. I do think, honestly, that feeling of safety is getting in the way of some of the boldness we need to win in AI.
So it's interesting you say that. I was having a conversation with a colleague just the other day where it was, I completely understand why this is helpful for us as an organization. Absolutely, the efficiencies are obvious, but what about the societal impacts? What about those downstream things? And I think when you look at all the polling and surveys, and certainly in Canada, there's a I'll call it a healthy skepticism that I didn't see, Jonathan, in the early days of the digital revolution in the early 2000s when I was moving from print to digital in media. This one, there does seem to be a greater or heightened awareness, and certainly the Anthropic Claude / OpenAI military conversation last week, I think, was a great use case for how that happens. Dina, look, I have to think that in healthcare with the Hippocratic Oath, like this is it's probably the hardest space maybe to have these conversations because of the literally life and death decisions that people make every day. So how is the healthcare system navigating this debate, I guess is the only way to frame it.
Yeah, it's probably the hottest topic in healthcare today, in front of illnesses, is the adoption of AI. And there's truly a lot of different categories of healthcare that adopt it differently. When I think of, and I'm speaking specifically to the Canadian system here, when I think of our family medicine or GPs, and we've all been in their offices where it's paper charts, pencil, that is not efficient. And what those efficiencies or inefficiencies lead to, longer wait lists, taking weeks to go see your GP because they don't have time, right? They're then translating those notes and voice recording them into a system. That is a simple example of how you can incorporate AI, build efficiencies, fix the healthcare system, well, improve, I should say, see patients sooner, let patients be diagnosed sooner. So many positive ripple effects there. Yes, there's a cost to AI, and that's actually probably one of the biggest concerns for most in healthcare at this level. However, when you offset it with the efficiencies and ability to see more patients, it truly outweighs. And from my perspective, Well Health Diagnostic Centers is actually owned by the parent company of Well Health Technologies. Literally, our goal is to tech enable physicians. And I would say we do it very well, but you have to be very thoughtful in the way in which you do it. And there is no intention of replacing doctors or replacing staff. It is entirely about there's ginormous pressures for patients. There's a lack of resources in our healthcare system. How can we see more patients, but not put more strain on people? That is an incredibly difficult balance. Then you have the other end of the spectrum where we're very behind in healthcare, having AI interpret results. And a lot of them really is there's ministry aspects, there's federal considerations to make. You still have humans, radiologists, cardiologists, name the specialists that are reviewing your reports. And there is a high degree of comfort amongst most Canadians, and that still being the case. There is a slight shift because the trade-off is just time, but it is quite the challenge. We try to incorporate AI as much as possible, balancing the cost, balancing the patient safety, balancing the PHIPAA regulations that we need to be very mindful of and high security. There's a lot more in healthcare in adopting AI than just adopting AI for the sake of efficiencies. And we're very, very mindful of that blend.
Jonathan, I want to come back to you. There's a question from Sydney, and please keep the questions coming. We like to close this up and wrap it up right on time. So we've got about 15 minutes left. So keep feeding those questions. Jonathan, the question from Sydney is people who are chronically online. In your past life, I know you were marketing and PR and other things. If you went to bed or you left the office on Friday of last week, and you thought you were going to have a nice weekend, well, you woke up Saturday morning to war in Iran. That was Saturday morning. By Monday, now we've got the Strait of Hormuz, we got oil prices, we got bond prices, we got gold, we got oil, and a whole new world just in the last week alone. What are some of the coping strategies or people who are exposed to the headline stressors of the world due to the nature of their work, like comms people or journalists? If they can't turn it off during their workday, how should they approach it?
Yeah, I mean, I think this applies to a variety of different industries, and even the startup culture, which there's a term floating around now, 996, which is people working nine to nine, Monday to Friday, and some of it on Saturday, so 6 days a week. I think it's back to the question of how should we be reimagining work given the technology stack that now is available to us. And so I think to that point of if we have constant news cycles, and to your point, David, you wake up one morning and you got to respond on a Saturday, that's a downside because we've got a lot more stimulus that's happening outside of Monday to Friday. But on the flip side, now we have technology. So how do you reimagine your Monday to Friday to create flexibility in that time block to get other things done to free up some flexibility, right? And so across our portfolio, we've seen certain companies, some are now remote first. And so what does that mean, right? So like an example, like Wealthsimple has a 90 days away policy where you can actually work outside of Canada for up to 90 days a year. Now that is a flip side benefit to the technology because they're a remote first firm. They obviously operate a lot on Zoom and these sort of things, but that's a new form of flexibility that's been created since the pandemic that 10 years ago you couldn't possibly do your work without going into the office. So I think it's a question of there's new technology. The new technology has created some downside effects of, hey, we're constantly being potentially accessible. The flip side is how do we look at that more creatively to create other opportunities for us to maybe go to appointments during the week when we've got a bit of a downtime in the cycles, or be more flexible with more remote work environments. And even the element of this fractional support. There's a lot of individuals now who actually work fractionally that work part-time remotely for a few firms instead of just one. And that flexibility has really been created as well because of this kind of technology change. So I think I would encourage folks to kind of reimagine how they want to take a look at their work stream to kind of accommodate some of these changes in technology.
I'll follow up with, there was a question from James here of how return to office mandates are impacting that. And I'm curious, the companies you work with, it sounds like they actually are not pushing that very sternly, but there are a lot of companies that are now mandating people get back to work 4 days a week in the office. Um, is that contradictory?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the company, right? I think if you take a look at the adoption cycle, I think, in the peak of the pandemic, there was a lot of folks that were like, okay, we're fully remote because we have to be, right? And if you'd asked them that question 2 weeks before the pandemic, could you function as a company remote? They would, 98% of them, I'm sure, would have said no, but they found out a way to do it, and they did it. Then you kind of double click and you move a couple of years forward, and I'll just take a look at my portfolio as an example. There were a few portfolio companies that were fully remote. You could work wherever you wanted. Well, you started to figure out that things like time zones kind of mattered, right? If you were half your team 6 hours away, well, that's not super efficient. And then other people who never got a chance to see their work colleagues. Well, for the first year, that was kind of interesting, but actually, few people I know that had a fully remote role opted to take a second or a third one. They still really wanted some sort of degree of human interaction. So I think there is an element of rebalancing, going from 100% remote to what is the balance that works for your organization. But I think it can be a competitive advantage for certain firms who, like Wealthsimple, Coho, some of our other ones, Nesto, do have a bit more of a flexible work arrangement. They can draw more remote talent, but also you get some of the top flyers who might be saying, hey, I'm working in AI, I'm a leader in it, but I want to be, spending the winter in Brazil. Okay, well, you can do that in that sort of setup.
Carolyn, question from Peter, and I may twist it a bit. He asks any specific advice from the panel on how psychological safety can be nurtured at all levels in the company. If you feel like you want to answer that, great. But I would also ask, a part of that to me is trust of leadership. What have we seen? Are leaders in companies at the moment more trusted, less trusted by their teams? And how important is that trust at a time when, in times of crisis, you may be more predisposed to make unilateral decision making quickly, which I assume would erode trust. So how do we balance that psychological safety while also, building trust and having to make hard decisions quickly?
Sure. And they're absolutely related, right? I think trust is a huge component of building psychological safety. I'm struck by, I think it's Edelman puts out those reports every year, or who are the trusted leaders. It turns out business leaders, maybe this isn't a race to win, are actually amongst the most trusted at the moment. I think it's because we have such low trust in other leaders, but relatively speaking, business leaders are doing okay.
You know who's not trusted? Media. But keep going.
Well, I'd say there is something to that, right? So in a world where there is lots of uncertainty out there, the place that you spend most of your waking hours, you actually spend more time at work probably with your family. Having leaders that you can trust in that one realm of your world is actually really important when it's maybe questioned in other aspects. I come back to like the classic trust equation, right? And what are the four pieces of that? The first one, maybe the simplest, are they credible? Do you actually believe that the leaders have the knowledge to even know what they're talking about, right? I think for the most part, people see that, other than, at the moment, there's so much change. Maybe no one can know all the answers, but are they credible? Are they reliable, right? Did they do what they say they're going to do? Do they walk the talk? People watch, right? It's not just what you say, but it's how you show up. Relationship is important. And I do think this remote versus not remote or hybrid is a piece of that. It's hard to have really deep relationship when you don't know people. There was something interesting in the pandemic where CEOs were actually able to get on their iPhone and talk to thousands of their employees at once. And in some places, the intimacy scores and the connection scores actually went up versus it being a scripted video that had been well produced that no one actually believed was really them. And so it's not necessary that it has to be in person or has to be remote, but is there a sense of relationship? I know this human, they know me. It's someone that I would believe in. And then the last part around intentions, right? Is the person actually solving for the same thing I'm solving for? And David, to your point, I think that's so important, even in a time where maybe they have to make quick decisions behind closed doors. If you believe that they're solving for your best interest or for the company's best interest, it doesn't necessarily have to always be a democratic process, right? In the decision making, as long as you think that interests are there. And I think that's the trick, right? Because right now, senior leaders are solving for multiple stakeholders at once. Their investors, their employees, their customers, maybe the community they operate in, maybe the politicians that they need to keep on side. And all those interests aren't always the same. And I think that's really the rub in all of this. we talked about multi-stakeholder capitalism. That was all a great idea, the business roundtable. But what happens when the stakeholders all want something different from you, and you can't possibly please them all? And I think that's part of what's questioning or eroding some of this, is people are being trustworthy to some, but maybe less so to others, because they're trying to kind of navigate in between.
Okay, we only have a few minutes left, but I do want to give you all a chance to kind of, if you can get on your soapbox for 5 seconds here and just kind of let news you can use. I would love for people to be able to come away from this conversation with a few tangible, okay, as a leader, here's how I'm going to tactically approach this as I go through the next month, let alone year, given all the news that's happening. So if you all feel comfortable, I'll start with you, Dina. Could you just share, advice as if you were sitting down with a CEO right now, a couple of things that you would advise them to do or think about as they go through March as a leader?
Yeah, thank you. So one thing that we do, and I would definitely encourage others to do, is actually understand the structural pressures. We really can't solve the problem without fully embedding ourselves in it and getting to know it. And that's something that reality is leaders don't always have time to do. Fully respect that. But we need to have a team that will allow us and to help us understand the structural pressures, whether it's aging populations, workforce shortages, burnout and attrition post-pandemic, and the list goes on. But what are those pressures? Where can we be resilient? Is it funding? Is it quality? Is it regulatory oversight? There's something that we can't necessarily have all the answers to as CEOs, but I'm certain that we have very capable teams around us that could help, and in a collaborative method, better understand these pressures and allowing us for the resiliency. And then where are we vulnerable? I think that's the piece that we don't really chat about enough, whether it's the people capital, whether it's fatigue, whether it's fragmented digital systems. We don't really chat about the vulnerability enough, and I would encourage that. You might not be able to have a quick fix. That's typically why we're vulnerable. And it could be a capacity, but we need to understand what these are and start breaking them down. And if I were to look at the system, like the Canadian healthcare system as an example, like our system itself is clinically strong, right? We've got great institutions, we have great clinicians throughout the country, but operationally highly strained. And resilience for us depends on agility, it depends on digital integration and truly workforce sustainability. It needs to be broken down into 1, 2, 3, 5 categories, however it is, depending on your workforce, for us to be able to move forward. That would be my takeaway.
Great, thank you. Jonathan, same question to you. And to be a little provocative, I'll ask you or poke you, the idea of burnout. As a CEO, should I care?
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely should care. I think, the bit of advice I would give is, we're all in this together, right? Like everyone is navigating the same situation. There's a lot coming at us. Nobody has the established playbook of how AI is going to look in our industries in 2 to 3 years. We weren't even discussing this 5 years ago. So my advice is really in which we do a lot in the venture community, is benchmarking and connecting with your peers, right? Like you are not in this alone. Tap folks that are in similar situations and similar organizations and divide and conquer. Maybe they have a really strong lens toward one angle that you can learn from, and you can share that as well. If you're stressed, pressure test ideas with your peers, with your community, and we're going to collectively figure this out together. You are not on your own. And we collectively will chart the best path forward. So I think benchmarking, building community, tapping your colleagues and peers for ideas and support and resilience is, I think, one of the best ways forward in uncertain times.
Great stuff. Carolyn,
Sure.
advice for leaders.
I'll take the bait on the burnout one and then keep going. I mean, look, even I'll be edgy for a second. Even if we don't want to be all nice to people, if we're just being smart from a capitalist point of view, it is bad brain science to have people working not at their peak. So many of these industries, your asset are your people's brains, right? Whether it's tech or financial services or healthcare, their ability to make decisions, their ability to be creative. And all the brain science shows that if people are operating without sleep, under immense stress, they're actually not going to do right by your business. And so even if you just take the hardest line view, it is a bad resource decision to not take care of people's mental health and well-being. Right. And so one tactic that people do, it's not a save all by any means, but it's the idea of managing both your life and your organizations as a series of sprints. Right. We've all been sprinting hard for at least 5 years, just wave on wave on wave. And that's exhausting. You also can't just be sort of a marathon runner that just plugs away, because I think the markets are demanding more. And so what are those natural kind of sprints which have then a moment of recovery? So then you can rally the energy to go again. And I feel like we haven't had enough of those moments. There hasn't been a time to take a breath. So how do you create those for your organization? It might be literally, right? Some teams, literally take a day off together, right? But it can also be when you're doing something hard, can you celebrate a win? Sometimes celebrating a win, honestly saying thank you, showing gratitude. They sound really minor, but these little things create a breath in the organization, a chance for a person to kind of pause for a second, regroup and get the reserves going to do another sprint. And I think we all need to look for those moments.
Okay, terrific. Dina, understand structural pressures and where we can be resilient, and most importantly, where we are vulnerable. That's advice for leaders. Jonathan, we're all in this together. Benchmark against your peers. And Carolyn, take care of people. Do the sprints. And celebrate your wins and say thank you. Well, I'm going to say thank you to the three of you for a wonderful conversation. I genuinely can't think of a conversation that is more relevant in this day and age than this one. And so I hope that our audience had a chance to write a few things down. I certainly did, that I'll take back and hopefully apply in my own life. So thank you all three for the opportunity to have this conversation over lunch. I also want to thank Marie-Chantal Cote and Sun Life for sponsoring this event. Sun Life really does think deeply about these things, financially, physically, mentally, and it's great to be able to partner with them to be able to bring these conversations to life. Also, thank you to our audience. We had some great questions. Really grateful that you could all join us. And if you're not already a subscriber, please find that link in your chat. We need your support. That's what makes this all goes round. If you did enjoy today's event and would like to learn how you can get involved, please get in touch with our partnerships team. They're terrific, Ariel Lepper-Walker and Emily Wazenik. And a reminder, our big summit, Carolyn spoke at our summit one year. It's a great event. Fourth annual summit will take place in Toronto on November 2nd. Save the date. It is our marquee event, and it is always a good time, not just because of the great panelists and speakers and live journalism that happen on stage, but also because of the people in the room that you get to meet and collaborate with, and maybe, to Jonathan's point, compare your benchmarks and peer metrics against. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and the team behind the scenes. You can find us, The Logic, on X, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn, and we'll do it again soon. Bye-bye, everybody.